Welcome. Well, we are here for our annual tradition, sitting with the Mayor to look at the good, bad, and the ugly of the past year, as well as taking a look ahead at the year coming. Let's start, Your Worship, with the kind of the elephant in the room, and that was something that was discussed recently, mid-December, in taxes, and it's the annual, start to the tax season. But we had a 0% tax hike last year. There was a lot of creative accounting to get to that point. We had to look at some safe restart money. At this point, very early stages, but we're looking at 6.37, 6.60 if we have added enhancements.
Right.
That's a big pill to swallow.
Yeah, and I think you've really hit the nail on the head, though, Cheryl. You've talked about very preliminary. So that document came from our finance department to finance and audit. It hasn't even gone to council yet, so it will go to council. Finance and audit asked, though, if staff could go back and take a look at what a reduction of 2% would look like from 6.37%. That reduction of 2% accounts for about $2.7 million of revenue to find to reduce it by 2%. So there's a lot of work to be done. The first actual budget discussion is going to happen in early January. And that's the point where we're really able to dig into the document. Staff have completed all of the projects. We have our funded and unfunded list. We have our operational side of the organization, and that will give us an opportunity to really focus in.
But how do you trim $2 million or 2% from the tax levy without touching roads, street, snow removal, or general infrastructure?
So let's take a look at two things. One is, and we've had a very good year when it comes to snow removal. We're at about $5.5 million today, and you recall we have a budget of about $10 million. So we have some flexibility there. We have about, $2 to $3 million in flex. We still have a great portion of the original $3 million of restart money that we were going to apply to the 2021 taxes. So we've got a couple of areas there that we can use safe restart money for. We can take a look at the snow budget, though I'm very reluctant to reduce service. Let's keep that in mind. As far as I'm concerned, we have a Cadillac service when it comes to snow removal. But those are two items. And I think as we move through, the budget information we're getting from staff, it may in fact be bits and pieces from various areas, but I think we want to be careful about the service delivery.
What concerns me is that so much, more than half of that $7.2 million need to maintain services for the city, more than half of that is RCMP wages and city wages. So those are very unforgiving elements that you have to try and contend with.
Exactly, it's very difficult. Of course, we have a union contract that we've negotiated and settled on, so that's in place, so that has an impact on the budget, the RCMP. But let's not forget, and I don't mean to add fuel to this fire and sort of the downside of this, but we're looking at retroactive pay for the RCMP as well, that we have made some concession for over the years, and have some of that covered off. But you're absolutely right, it is very difficult. So I think for us, another piece of it may be looking at enhancements. If we have the RCMP coming to us for an enhancement, let's take a look at it.
The other thing I think we have to address, I mean, it's been talked about ad nauseum really, is that parkade. And some changes, some really significant changes have been made to make sure that and many other overruns for capital projects don't happen again.
Yep, and I'm glad you brought it up because you're absolutely right. I had, made a presentation almost 8 or 9 months ago about the steps that council were going to take, and we've taken those steps. And just to give a bit of a highlight what those steps look like, the first one was changing the delegated authority for the city manager, which reduced the amount of that delegation and meant that when there is a budget overrun, it has to come back to council. So that reduction was significant. We've taken a look at external and internal roles when it comes to the reviewing capital projects. And I think the other big one, Cheryl, is whistleblower piece has been put in there. The other significant one is that we're doing an extremely extensive review of our capital project process and how we conduct those processes within our organization. And I think that, that's a really key piece to what we're doing. The external projects, as I've mentioned, are important. And I'll give you an example. The daycare that's going in beside the Park House condo development has had a third party review that project as it progresses through various stages. And that's worked out quite well. And I think that it was a good test for us because those were grant dollars. And we have no flexibility on grant dollars. So if the grant is X number of dollars, that project cannot overrun. So this has been a very good exercise for us in using that third-party review for that particular project. Not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but still important to have the review.
Safe Streets bylaw, bit controversial, but recently heard from Bylaw Services, over 300 complaints since September 1st when that bylaw was enacted. So we've had a bit of running room with that bylaw to see how it's doing. Are you getting a positive sense from that?
Yeah, we haven't had any tickets issued, and I think early on, rather than using it as an enforcement tool, it's used as an educational tool. It gives our bylaw officers an opportunity, which they have for a very long time, created a rapport in the downtown. And it was about moving people along, and there's a list of things within that bylaw that the bylaw officers will make sure it doesn't happen, and a lot of that is around loitering in front of businesses and those kinds of things. So I think it's achieved something that perhaps we weren't quite prepared for, because we looked at it when we were told we're going to use it as an educational tool. You kind of wonder if that's going to work, and I think in a lot of areas of the downtown it has worked. But again, a controversial step. But I think I could say to folks that thought we were going to use it as a strict enforcement tool, that just has not been the case.
It was the launch of the Safe, Clean and Inclusive, ended up being Communities Committee.
The recommendations that came out of the committee really created a lot of what we're seeing here today. And as a result of that, we've seen recommendations that have resulted in 4 more bylaw officers, great advances in various housing partnerships with BC Housing. We've continued to have great initiatives with that particular ministry. But I think the other thing, as a result of the things that came out of the select committee, was the fact that we were eligible and did receive a grant of $1.9 million. That $1.9 million offered us the opportunity to start the Community Safety Hub, which has the situation table in it, and it's a collection of agencies that come together to talk about what's happening downtown, share information, share ideas, and I think that has really been a large part of the success from the recommendations out of the select committee. There's a number of pieces to this as well. A number of downtown initiatives, for example, the safety initiatives, cleanliness initiatives, the partnership we have with Downtown Prince George. And interestingly enough, when we went through this grant process, Cheryl, there was, I think, 48 communities that applied. We ranked number 9th out of the 48. And again, the select committee and the work that was done and the recommendations that came out, I think, were really an impetus for us to be able to attract those grant dollars to apply to many of the things that we're seeing happening downtown.
I had totally forgotten about this organization that was created, the BC Urban Mayors Caucus. Yeah. What precipitated that committee?
What precipitated that was the fact that 3 or 4 mayors, and I was one of them, used to contact each other and I guess commiserate a bit, talk about things that were happening in their community. And conversations would take place just out of the blue. And we were having a conversation and somebody said, well, why don't we pull mayors together? Everybody is suffering from the same plight. And we were talking specifically about downtown. So there's 13 of us, and I think I represent probably the smallest partner of the group, a little under 85,000 people. Most of them are in excess of that. 13 of us from around the province and from the larger cities in the province. Yes, there are a few more that aren't on the caucus, but could be at some point. And that was really the impetus. And now we've started to share ideas. We've become a real advocacy group, and we are advocating to the federal government, provincial government. We've set in place a pillar approach. One of the pillars obviously is around housing and dealing with the social issues in communities. But one of the pillars is a change in fiscal, I guess, not management, but fiscal, the way the province delivers dollars to municipalities, if you will. And that fiscal framework has been in place for a multitude of years. And so what we're suggesting is let's take a look at that fiscal framework and can it be changed in some way. We're not talking about additional taxes, we're just talking about the framework. And if you recall, I co-chaired the committee from UBCM around the fiscal policies and fiscal framework as well that came out of a discussion, goodness, about a year ago. And that has much the same tack to it. How can we more easily and simplify that fiscal relationship that we have with the province?
I hazard to say the fiscal relationship that municipalities have with the province is called download.
Well, we want to keep away from that, you know. And I think here's a good example. Prince George will compete with a Terrace or a Quesnel for dollars. Doesn't seem quite right. So what we're saying is take the competitive edge out of it and let's come up with something that is more equitable when we're not having to compete either in a grant form or some other form with smaller communities, or even for us competing against larger communities. And that's really what it is.
Let's look at some good news.
Yes, let's talk good news because
Yes.
there is some. There's lots.
Every month, the building permits
Yep.
stats come out on the council agenda, and it's been a steady progression on the positive side
Yeah.
for a couple of years now.
Yep.
And what do you read into that, the building permits?
Success.
You don't have to go very far in this town. Drive around, you'll see
Well,
it.
you know, when I first came in 2014, for me it was, as you know, I'm keen on development, and for me that's what drives this city. Since 2015, we're going to hit about $1.1 billion worth of building permits. So I will tell you what that means to me. It means jobs. It means that the fellow that is an electrician, a plumber, he has a trades ticket. He doesn't have to go to Fort McMurray. He can stay here in Prince George. And I've had this experience where I've had a young fella, we were in a barber shop, and his young boy was getting a haircut, and the barber said, "Are you working here at home?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Thanks to this guy." And it's just not me though, it's council. It's our staff, because we were driven to just try to really enhance development. He's able to stay at home, and we see that across the city. Look at the development that's taking place in areas that people would never have thought would have been developed. And interestingly enough, Cheryl, it's well in excess of 90% of that is private sector development. So that translates to me that private sector has great faith in what's happening in Prince George, and they should have. We're reaping the benefit of the resource sector. And it's development is happening. It means jobs in our community, and it means that young folks that have grown up here, have stayed here to go to school, they don't have to go away. They can stay here and get good jobs.
No pun intended, but how do you build on that?
Well, we take a look at economic forecasts, and things look pretty good for the next 2 or 3 years. There doesn't seem to be a downward turn in it. I would mention a couple of other things as well. If you take a look at, I call it our inland ports, sea and rail. People sometimes forget about the importance of that in our community as well. It's things like that that are thriving and expanding, and I think we're going to see a multitude of that over the next 2 or 3 years.
So we have probably the single largest project that's underway in our city right now is that pool just across the way. There is a bunch of land, new fire hall. We're looking at what is going to be developed downtown. What would you like to see on a personal front? What would you like to see happen to that site where the old pool is, the old Four Seasons Leisure Pool?
So let's leave the Coliseum out of it. You didn't bring it up, but it's getting old, and at some point there will be a council that has to make a decision on it. So what I would like to see happen is that we develop and we'll call it a precinct downtown, that really includes a few things. It includes the pool, includes the library, the student housing, includes the Canada Games Plaza, includes the Hyatt. We've got Park House development. We've got another condo development going ahead across the street from TELUS. I'd like to see us start to do, pool is gone. I think we have the opportunity to do an add-on to the Civic and Conference Center that may be used for a performance center. I think that that's got to be top of mind when we have a conversation about expanding that particular location. A performance center for me is a multitude of things, and you can appreciate that I'm probably not the person to talk about what that should look like. It should be the professionals that talk about what a performance center might look like. I think there's an opportunity to do something there. Council of the day, whenever that is, decides that that may be a project they want to take on. I think it needs to be downtown. I think you start then to take a look at the fire hall location, great for some housing as well. I think we're going to see more housing downtown. There's an opportunity to narrow 7th Avenue to make it more walkable, more friendly from that perspective. Maybe you narrow that to 2 lanes. We've seen some of this happen in other areas. I'll go so far as to say when you take a look at the extension of 15th Avenue, once it gets to the Civic Center, you can, from my perspective, you could close that road once you got to the rear entrance to the Civic Center. There's just a lot of opportunity to do things differently, Cheryl. Not the same old, okay, well, we'll tear it down and we'll build something and then walk away. I think we can really be innovative in designing a precinct that includes all of those pieces into something that's pretty spectacular for downtown Prince George.
I'm going to go a little off script here. Speaking of infrastructure, that's a huge issue for a lot of municipalities. You look at the infrastructure money they're going to have to spend in the Lower Mainline just to fix those roads, et cetera, et cetera. So there's probably not going to be a lot of money in the kitty provincially to help with infrastructure. But that's a huge. We've seen just even something as simple as the integrated stormwater management plan. That's millions and millions of dollars that municipalities, ourselves included, have to face.
Yeah, we've got probably $3 or $4 billion worth of upgrades in infrastructure over the next number of years. I will say our staff have done a magnificent job in taking a look and, as you know, and rating our infrastructure, just below ground and above ground. And that's the instrument that councils over the next couple of decades are going to have to look to making decisions on what goes first. And that information obviously is going to be generated, continue to be generated by staff, but they have done a fantastic job giving council the tool to be able to make certain decisions, or at least understand the decisions that are being made by staff as well, as to why those particular infrastructure needs are a necessity. 7th Avenue, for example, when we dug that up, I think we found an 80-year-old wooden water line, for crying out loud. And that, you know, that's not the only place that we're going to see that. One of the things that we don't talk about a lot is that we have large neighborhoods in our city that are reaching 40, 50, 60 years old. And they're not just 4 or 5 or 10 block radius, Cheryl. They are huge clumps of residential housing that we need to be, and we are vigilant about, saying, okay, when are we going to have to start looking at those areas? And staff have done that work already.
Finally, looking forward to 2022, it's an election year.
It is, yeah.
So what are you anticipating will be some of the issues, hot button issues in this election?
You know, I'm going to suggest that there's probably going to be hot button issues, but also there's going to be issues that people, I would hope, would also take into consideration. And so the hot button issues will be around infrastructure, taxes. It'll be around services that we provide. I think not necessarily a hot button issue, but there'll have to be, I think, some decisions made around the Coliseum. And so those will be the clump of issues, I think, when you talk, you know, about hot issues. But I think there's other issues that need to be talked about. I think you mentioned it. What about the tearing down of the fire hall and tearing down of the Four Seasons pool? That has to be talked about. People will want to know what plans individual candidates have. But I think there also has to be a discussion about the growth of the city. Transportation corridors, our ability to service what is a huge, huge area. As you know, our municipal boundaries are huge, and that is a cost driver. I think that should be discussed. Just a multitude of things, capital projects, lots of things on the list. But when you say hot issues, I would say that some of those hot issues would be exciting to attack, and they're things that I've just mentioned, like the Four Seasons pool area and the fire hall area. That'd be exciting to talk about.
Exactly. Anything you want to conclude with?
I guess what I would conclude with is that it's been a challenging year with COVID. It's been a challenging year, 2020, 2021. And we'll see what 2022 will bring when it comes to COVID, because that really directs a lot of the things that we have to do. It has impacted our revenue. And I'm excited about some of the bigger events coming back to Prince George, because that's a big driver of our economy as well. Helps small business, helps tourism, it helps hoteliers and restaurateurs. So that's a big thing. And I think that I guess there are difficult issues, and that things have been challenging. But for me, it's about weighing it, and it's about finding a balance. And I would hope people would find that balance, because there are some fantastic things that have occurred in this city, Cheryl, and continue to happen. You and I have lived here for a very long time, and it is a fantastic place to grow up. It's a fantastic place to live, and I think that we need to start to take a look at those positive attributes that this city provides.
Well, thank you for taking some time.
Appreciate
yes, indeed. Thank you for watching. Good night.